Of all the different kinds of content that you can create, blog posts with the written word, videos with video, of course, podcasting with the audio has been the most impactful for my business and the most impactful for many of my students as well. Podcasting is pretty interesting because when you consider where people are consuming this content, you're actually able to get in front of an audience for much longer in places that video and the written word could never go. If you listen to a podcast, think about where you listen. You might be at the gym or on a walk or traveling somewhere, commuting in a car. And more than just the ability for you to stay in front of an audience for longer. And by longer, I mean several minutes, if not hours longer. You're able to build a much deeper, more real relationship with an audience. And when it comes to building a brand online, when it comes to selling anything online, there's one thing that you need more than anything, and that's trust. And that relationship that you build with a listener is the best kind of trust you could ever earn. In this video, I want to convince you why you need to start a podcast. And I want to start with what the podcast has done for me. Even as somebody who is introverted, somebody who has never been on stage or gotten behind a microphone before. In fact, I was quite scared when I first started. I had just gotten laid off and I heard about a podcast and I wanted to start one of my own. And it took me a year and a half to muster up the courage to finally publish my first episode in July of 2010. But ever since then, everything started to happen. Number one, I started to get listeners and people who would have never found me otherwise. Number two, with regards to the people who were on my show, I started to build amazing relationships with people, even people like Gary Vaynerchuk and Tim Ferriss and Amy Porterfield. I started to notice that the podcast was actually helping to increase my email list and also help us generate more income as well in the business. And finally, and most importantly, I started to notice that I was getting a lot of thank yous for people who specifically came from listening to the show. I had been a blogger for several years before starting my podcast, but I had never gotten this kind of feedback from anything else before. All the handwritten notes that I have, they're basically all people who listen to the podcast. That's the kind of connection you can make. And that, to me, is the reason why you might want to start a podcast. Now, in this video, I want to give you some of your first steps, things that you can consider as you're starting this journey. I have some more resources for you as well to help you further. I've helped tens of thousands of people start their podcast, both in premium courses and free on YouTube, and I'm here to help you too. But I want to talk about some of the things that you might be thinking about as you're thinking about starting a show. Number one, if you were like me and you're a perfectionist, it's going to be very difficult for you to get started. You have to get over the fact that you have to be a disaster before you become the master. Your first episodes are going to be terrible, but you can't get to the good stuff until you get through the muck. So publish your first episodes without regret, even though they're not going to be perfect. I listened back to some of my first episodes and I cringe.
Woohoo! Welcome to the very first session of the Smart Passive Income Podcast. I can't believe it's finally here. Wow, I've been talking about doing this podcast for so long.
I cringe, but I'm also very grateful that I got through that to get better. And the more often you do it, the more consistent you are, the better you will become. Number two, you might be worried about the fact that, well, your niche is quite small, right? You want to podcast to a bigger, wider audience and that there's not enough listeners out there in the podcasting space. Well, I want to introduce you to one of my students, Phil, who has a podcast called Scanner School. It's a very small niche in the electronic space, these handheld radios, that's his hobby. He created a podcast because he just loved the hobby so much he wanted to connect with other people and talk about it. And now, guess what? He has super fans, people who show up on every single live stream, people who come and listen to every single podcast episode. Now he's got companies reaching out to him and a lot more options than he had before, even though he was in a very small space. You might think that you have to have an audience already, that you can't start from scratch, but that's not true. Take Sophie Walker, for example, another one of our students who created a podcast called Australian Birth Stories. This podcast interviews moms who are going through birthing to help other moms feel like they're not alone and to understand what to expect. Her podcast literally started from zero. No email list, no following, nothing. Today, it is her full-time thing. She has millions of downloads and subscribers all over the world. And in fact, in many places in Australia, certain organizations require their employees to listen to her show because it's helping them out. How cool is that? Now, one more thing that I might guess that you might be thinking right now, and it's this idea that we might be too late to the game, that it might be too saturated to start a podcast right now. And I'm here to just tell you up front that that is absolutely not true. It may seem that way when you go onto Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify and you see other podcasts that are about certain topics that are similar to what you want to talk about. But number one, people want to hear from you. You are unlike anybody else. And as a result, you have the ability to create a unique show about a certain topic. To give you some perspective here, let's talk about blogs. There are over 500 million active blogs. That's a lot of blogs. There are over 50 million active YouTube channels. That's a lot of YouTube channels. In April of 2020, we just passed 1 million podcasts. That's it. And here in the early 2020s, we're going to see rapid growth, sort of like following the same path as blogging. And we're early. If you're watching this video, you are still early. But nothing's going to happen. You won't be able to grow that audience until you get started. Until you pick a show topic, you put yourself out there, you make some changes along the way and realize that it's going to be messy up front. But you're going to feel regret if you don't get started now when you see how much even bigger audio is going to grow. And I want to help you get started. I have some resources that have helped thousands of people get started. And I have links below for you and other areas where you can get started too. The best place to go would be to watch the podcasting tutorial videos that are linked to at podcastingtutorial.com. If you go there, it'll give you everything you need to get started. And if you want to go deeper, you need a little bit more hand-holding across the way, we have programs and other things that can help you with podcasting too. But I'm really excited because the truth is your audience is out there and they're waiting for you to publish your content so that you can help them further. And I want to help you get started. Because with a podcast and the platform that you can grow, with the relationships that you can have with the audience that you're going to build, you can do some amazing things. You can build an amazing life. You can help a lot of people. They need you. And so thank you so much. Podcastingtutorial.com is where you want to go, or check out all the links below to help you further. Thank you.